Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or somebody you know might be interested in coming on the show and chatting, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is Isaac R. Levin, or you can reach out to me on Mastodon. My handle there is Isaac R. Levin at fossinod.org. All right, so coffee's here. Let's have the conversation. I'm looking forward to it. We were having a great chat in the green room, and I had to kind of stop because I wanted to have some of it on air. So let's get to it. My guest today is Brit Meyers. Brit, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having me, Isaac. As you said, my name is Brit Meyers. I'm the VP of Engineering at System Initiative. I've been managing dev teams for a little over a decade, and yeah, excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because there's some things that we were talking about specifically around managing style and DevOps and like some of the things that, for what it's worth, like I don't know Brit very well, but I've heard her on other podcasts, and I'm looking forward to kind of diving deeper into some of those topics that she's had. And one of the things that I love to start out with is like origin stories. Like, when did you realize that technology was like the thing for you?
Yeah, I'm an accidental software engineer. I applied to college to be a civil engineer. I knew engineering. I knew I liked science. I knew I liked math, and did not get into I did not get into the engineering school that I
Sure,
applied to.
sure.
So I ended up as a math major and thought, oh no, like what am I what am I going to do as a math major? My whole thought was like, well, if I can prove that I'm smart, then maybe somebody will like show me what I could be smart about and help me fill in the blanks a little bit.
Sure.
And I think it was my had to be my I think it was my after my sophomore year of college, I had an internship at a small defense company outside of Dayton, Ohio, and that was like my first taste of. I mean, I had done sort of kiddie coding and just playing on the
Yeah,
side, nothing extreme. I was like very not exposed to CS basically at all,
sure.
uh, and that experience of both problem solving with like an explicit domain about what to solve, like the
Yeah.
tools I needed to do the solving, and immediately being connected to sort of like what the impact of the solutions were. That internship kind of gave me all of that, and I fell in love and oriented effectively the rest of my college around,
Yeah,
all right, I'm not changing majors. College is expensive.
sure.
How can I prove to somebody that I'm worthy of like an entry level software engineering role? And I suppose the rest they say is history.
The rest they say is history. So I'm fascinated by like the math major thing. Like, if folks that have listened to me, like I've done this rant 1,000 times, so I apologize. Like, the reason why I did not like, so I graduated with an IS degree. The reason why, well, there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the primary reasons why computer science, I was originally a computer science major, didn't work out is because I am bad at math. Like, I got to a particular level and realized that my brain doesn't work like that.
Uh-huh.
Uh, like, I got to limits in the infinite series type of work, and I'm just like, you can't make math like not math. Like, you can't do these things that don't actually make sense in the practical world. So, as somebody who went through the entire math curriculum, I'm fascinated to know it's like, how much of the stuff that you learned in college have you retained? And
Ooh.
and what's curious, and the second part of that is like, how have you been able to correlate some of the things that you've learned as a part of being a math major to solving business problems, like you mentioned a bit earlier? Because that's kind of one of the main reasons why I like technology.
Yeah. So I hope that there's none of my former professors listening, because I think I don't know that I've retained much, but maybe that's more of I have a hard time retaining information.
Sure.
So I learned how to learn. And I think
Yeah.
that's the piece that sort of has stuck with me and really helped me to, I don't know, be successful, I suppose, is I learned how to figure out what I need to do to like answer the question at hand
Hmm.
and move through it. Uh, I forget a lot of things after I do said things. So
Sure.
the sort of like cramming, pass the test, and then move on to the next one, forget all of it. I'm a
Yeah.
bit of a poster child there. But what it gives me now is I can read white papers. Like I understand the language of math. I understand the
Hmm.
language of uh, like talking about like taking these abstract concepts and like making them concrete,
Yeah.
or being able to like compare something abstract to something that is real
Yeah.
and know the differences, and so that I think helps me a ton. And then bits and pieces, what'll happen is like system initiative, there's a lot of graph
Yeah.
theory
Mm-hmm.
happening.
Sure.
I took graph theory. I couldn't tell you what I learned in graph theory, but I can relearn it because I know
Yeah.
I learned it
Sure.
once.
Yeah. Well,
you
is
know?
it kind of like it's kind of like the what's the cliche like riding a bike, right? Like you might like oh I haven't ridden a bike in 20 years. There's no way. And then you get on it and after about 30 seconds your muscle memory, your brain
Like,
chemistry,
yeah.
yeah.
I just have to remember what to Google, right? Like the equivalent of like what like put my pedals on. Like I have to remember what to Google to figure out like
Yeah.
what's the paper that I read, or
Ex-
what's the thing that I
yeah.
learned. But yep, it's all like the tip of my brain.
That's fascinating. Like because I think for the like people that go through computer science curriculums, they kind of have like two paths, right? They have like the I'm going to get a job as an engineer, writing forms over data apps, solving business problems, like that sort of stuff. Or I'm going to go into like the more academic side, which is where I'm going to do research. I'm going to look at, maybe topics like security or topics like performance. Um, and I see the people that are more like in the like I like the math, I like the algorithms, I like those things. Like kind of more focusing on the research side. Like, that's probably an over exaggeration, but um like I guess my question is like with this math background, like if somebody asked you I have to solve this problem and that a solution for that problem doesn't exist, like going through the process of building out like some sort of like analytical like algorithm flow, is that something that comes pretty naturally to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And being able to sort of understand when, because I mean, as you said, like you learn a lot of the theory, you learn a lot of what can happen,
Yeah.
but often you don't like in college, you're not necessarily applying that to real
Nope.
concepts all the time, right? Like maybe, I had an operations research course, for example, and a lot of like supply chain analysis applies
Yeah.
to operations research, right? And you can think about that in software development, software delivery, and pipelines and bottlenecks and throughput, and you can squint and see some similarities.
Sure.
But it wasn't until I think the project was we ran some Markov model on, you were talking about college football earlier, based on the college football rankings of the time to sort of like could we predict the BCS rankings
Sure.
without the BCS existing? And I think
Yeah.
at the time, this was like, I don't even know when, this is like early 2000s. We ended up being like 80% accurate with what the BCS rankings like came out to be. But what I really need is the concrete to solidify the knowledge. And so I think part of where I didn't take math as far as I could have was like if I were to have sought out more concrete applications of these things, I probably would have pursued it a bit more aggressively. And I think a lot of what's happening with AI and machine learning right now, like you're seeing a lot more of this blend where people are looking for white papers, they're looking for the research that's happening, and there's libraries coming out that let you manipulate data in new ways or build models in these ways. That was very research heavy. It still
Yeah.
obviously is very research heavy, but you're seeing how that like now is flowing more directly into practical application. I'm like, okay, this is the model I use for this purpose here,
Yeah.
when, now, how and now, right? So it's something that, and it's true of CS. I hire an entry level engineer who just finished a CS degree. You still have to teach them how to be a professional developer. They know the science. Maybe they haven't had internships or they haven't had like practical work experience yet. Like there's still a lot of lessons to be had there. And I think that ability to just like take something abstract and find something concrete and like the analogies that exist, like that skill set I learned, like I needed to do that to survive the math program I was in,
Sure.
was
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
try to like make some concrete things in my brain so that I can understand these like abstract things. And that ability to draw analogies has carried me to today, in how do you communicate with non-technical folks? How do you
Yeah.
communicate with technical folks? How can you help them get on the same page? All of those things, my degree, the process of earning my degree like helped me to kind of bolster some of those skill sets for
Sure.
sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Here, like a side question, like, are you so you're talking about things like applying, like the idea of like problem solving to like I guess not like things that aren't typically solved by data, right? Like, are you a bit of a data nerd in that extent? Like, I can't remember what the website is, but like the website where you go to and you can like look at data slices for like everything. I can't remember what the name of the website is. That somebody's probably gonna yell at me in chat, like, "Oh, this website!" Like, and I go there occasionally. I'm just like, "Oh man." Like the ability to like look at this data and slice it in different ways is fascinating to me. Like I'm also like a baseball stat nerd, so like looking at baseball statistics is something that really intrigues me. Are you similar? Do you like have like this? I like looking how data like is related in different ways.
Yeah, I would say it's like it's a convenient hobby that I'll pick up, you know? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's like one of the tools, right? So like if I'll get like really interested in something, you know, like through grad school as an example, I got really interested in macroeconomic data. And I'm not really
Mm.
that interested in it so much anymore. Like I'm not checking these sites anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, I think to answer your question, yes. But it sort of ebbs and flows with like whatever the current thing is that I'm sort of, you know, hyper focused on, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Like I just had to look. I think the name of the project is like 538. Like they do like a lot of
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like they
Yes,
do
yes.
they like data analysis for everything. Like I'll go there and I'll just play around with stuff. Like I think Steve Ballmer also has like a website that has like a ton of like data slicing for like public information, which is always fascinating to me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So like the problem solving thing, right? And as somebody who I think I mentioned like the computer science information system sort of like fork in my like learning of technology is because I really liked applying like the technology that I was using to solve problems because I think that's what my natural like interest is like problem solving and like being curious about things like so and I think that in my opinion most technologists have that very similar thing like we're very curious. That's why you see a lot of folks that are like in the maker space. They're tinkerers by nature. Like do you have like a great story of like playing around with something? Like my go-to is like taking apart like the family computer like day two and my dad just being like fix this now because I didn't know how to
Yeah.
put it back together. Do you got a good story like that?
I don't know that I have a great like a single not a single story that sticks
Sure.
out for me, but I was the kid who like I took apart it's like I would take something apart but for like a very specific purpose, you know? It wasn't like
Mm.
so it wasn't vague like oh, I'd like to learn how it works, right?
Yeah.
Like the remote control, one of the buttons stopped working.
Oh.
I took it apart to figure out why the button wasn't working. I figured it out and then I like walked away because like for me it was like, well,
Yeah.
the job is done. I solved the problem, and the problem was I didn't know why it stopped working. And so
It's somebody else's job to actually fix it, right? Like,
yeah, no, my
yeah.
mom's like, wait, you took the remote apart? Like, are you gonna put it back together? And I'm like, it later,
Yeah. You're
eventually.
sounds like you'd have been like great like in the assembly line like 40, 50 years ago when we built cars by hand. It's like, oh, my job is like fixing this or figuring out this one thing, but it's not my job to either fix it or put it back together. Like I just put the door on, but somebody else's job is like whatever, right?
Yeah, and it's like once I like in the case of the remote, like I lost interest in fixing it because I knew how to
Mm,
do it. So like the
mm.
discovery of the solution is like the thing I'm constantly chasing.
That's
And
fascinating. So
yeah,
do you think it's not to get like psychoanalytical, but it's kind of like one of my kinks is psychoanalytic stuff. Like,
that's all right. I'm into it.
do you think like it's the chase of determining what the problem is more satisfying is more satisfying to you than the actual solving of the problem?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably much to the dismay of my husband. Yeah, I think so. And it's also I think where part of what kind of like naturally led me, part of what led me into like a leadership role was being able to sort of like rally a team
Mm-hmm.
around solving the problem
Yeah.
and knowing that it's solved. Like for me, there was no stress or anxiety about not
Sure.
being involved in the actual implementation, right?
Yeah.
So, in the case of the remote, it's like I knew how to get it back together, which means I
Mm-hmm.
didn't need to do it myself
Well,
because
that's
I was sort of like,
problematic. That's problematic. Knowing how to do something and choosing not to do it just because you have no interest. Like, I can imagine why a parent would be like, "Hey, what's your problem, kid? What's going on here?" But like what you said is interesting. Like the idea of being able to relinquish control is a bit interesting, right? We were talking about this a bit earlier. Like we were talking about like being type A or not type A, right? And I think people that are type A, like they need to have their hands like in the
uh-huh.
entire experience. And people that aren't type A are okay with the relinquish of control, right? Like, have you come into scenarios where you felt like you needed to have like that control all the way through? Like, maybe you took you want to make sure that something was correct because it for whatever reason like it directly impacted you, or you really want to make sure that it was being done. Like, have you had? I guess the question is, have you had issues ever being able to kind of hand off to folks?
Yeah. Oh, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think that's one of the one of the most important lessons I think you learn as like going from like an individual contributor into a leadership role
Mm-hmm.
is being able to make that transition gracefully. Which means in the beginning it's usually not very graceful, right? And so as you start stepping into formal leadership roles, it becomes very important to know like who is doing what, and like have I delegated effectively, and like
Yep.
what is the expectation, right? And so, even in that case of if I don't know why we're gonna like end up running with this stupid remote control analogy
No,
forever,
it's
but
great. It's great.
like the
It's
remote,
great. It's
like
great.
with that remote control, right? Like there's a world where I can delegate putting it back together, but
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not explicit enough, maybe what's put together is like the button's still broken. Like they didn't actually fix, like the reason
Yeah.
we took it apart in the first place, like we didn't end up fixing it, And
Yeah.
so like communication and alignment and like knowing how to communicate and talking about what good looks like all of those skills like become so important. Uh, and it's usually like when I start finding myself like seeking more control, I've sort of trained myself to like reflect on like, well, what is the thing I'm worried I've missed? Like
Mm.
what am I worried about? Like what is the thing that like because if for me to do my job effectively, I need to be able to have as little control as possible
Yes.
in the tactics so that I can continue looking forward and
Yeah.
looking for growth and looking for, and blocking and tackling and helping, get things out of the way. And so that urge to like dive in deeper is like now a symptom, and I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
what's going on, because I shouldn't need to do that, because if I have to do that in order for every single project to succeed, for
Sure.
every
Yeah.
feature to succeed, like it just won't work, and so why this one, why this case,
Yeah, we talked about this
and
a bit earlier too. Like, in my opinion, like a failure of leadership is like not being able to trust your people, right?
right,
Like, I think
right,
that's something that's, I think, very apparent. Like, everybody's had a manager that was a little bit too hands-on, and if that's not your style as an individual contributor, like, it become very, very challenging, like having to kind of circle back all the time with somebody who's literally just keeping tabs on you, right?
mm-hmm.
Here's a question for you to kind of to continue this track of like what like where Brit is okay like getting their hands really dirty doing the work or versus kind of handing it off to somebody else because they have a better skill set, right? Like as I did some light research on you, like you said that you mentioned you like DIY stuff, like so as somebody who is married to somebody who is very much a fan of DIY, um, there is this thing all the time that exists where it's like you're in this constant state of like having projects that are not yet complete. So
Uh-huh. Have
what
you
is
been
your
talking to my husband by any chance? I'm just
I
curious.
I yes, actually, we have a conversation right now. He's like, please ask her why
Can you
the
please
yeah
finish the
yeah
built-ins that you said you would
yeah
finish?
can
Yes,
like can
yes.
we fix these cabinets? It's been months, lady. Anyway, but the reason why I want to ask this is because you're kind of like in this state. You have a few projects that are kind of like in creation mode, right? And depending on your availability to do the work, or maybe you don't have the right tools or the right stuff you need, like you kind of have to put things to the back burner, but your brain can't not DIY, so you
Uh-huh.
start another project. So what is your kind of temperament to like how long can you let a project sit? And like, if your husband needs to come in and kind of say, it's actually she doesn't ever finish anything, like
Yeah.
it's
I so I would say, there's like function and fashion, and I think
yep.
this applies to DIY. This applies to all aspects of life.
Mm-hmm.
When I start a project, like it's for a specific purpose. Like for
Yep.
me, like I'm not somebody who just like I won't just like repaint the wall because I wanted to, or I'm right now our house, we moved in a year ago. There's like no pictures on the wall, and I
Mm.
know that once I put the pictures on the wall, I'm probably not going to change them for a decade. And so I'm
Sure.
like really thinking about
Yeah.
what am
Yeah.
I going to put on the wall, because I don't just like aesthetically change the world around me. There's always like a reason for it. And so
Mm-hmm.
my barrier for like when a project is done is like, did it meet the reason that I did it in the first place?
Sure.
And if it does, for me, it's usually done for others, they would look at it and be like, well, it's not painted. You didn't finish the molding in this area, or it still
Mm,
needs to be caulked or whatever. I'm like, yeah, those are things I'll get to, but it's like, it's functional. And so I'm like,
yep.
I'm happy about it because whatever the reason was, like I met the need, I did the thing, and it was done.
You're like a minimal viable product junkie, aren't you?
I am a minimum. Yes, I think that's it. That's actually a really great way to put it, but also a like, you know, I don't know that anybody would pay for what I've done. So, like, minimum, yes, valuable. I don't to me,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, that's fascinating. Like, so here's a solution for the like pictures on the wall thing. Just buy a bunch of those like fancy like TV things that like rotate pictures. Problem solved. Problem solved. That I mean, I don't know if your budget can take that. My budget definitely can't. But like, there's a solution for everything. No, but it's fascinating. Like,
Then I look at them and I say, well, wait a second. That's expensive. I think give me a Raspberry Pi and some
oh
LEDs and I
no,
might
get
be
out
able
of here.
to.
No, so like so this is my downfall as well, right? Like so for Christmas, one of the things that we did, so like I like tinkering with tech and my wife likes like woodworking, whatever. So we built like an arcade for my kids using
That's
a
awesome.
Raspberry
Yeah.
Pi and all that, right? And like I just remember like at one point and like we're doing it in my office because it's a prize for the kids and like my office is an absolute like there's stuff everywhere. And I'm just like, this the kids better like this thing. Like, but like, yeah, my downfall too is like, oh, that's a fun little thing. So like I felt like at one point, like I was responsible for like the Raspberry Pi shortage. Cause I have like six of them. And like, I was trying to like, what can I like use this Raspberry Pi for? Like, cause it's just sitting here collecting dust. Like I should do something with
Uh-huh.
it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yep.
Here, so
Yeah.
here's an interesting like area to talk about too. It's like we've talked a bit about like the delegation of things, right? Like what is it when you like obviously everything is a bit different, but like when do you feel the most comfortable kind of doing that delegation? Is it do you like to be around a lot at the beginning? Do you like to, keep me updated on these things? Like let's say for instance like you're somebody shipping a feature, a new feature to something. You're like, how often do you like to be kept in the loop of that? Or do you just like to see the finished product?
Um, I like the story. So it's less about like keeping tabs and checking in from a like, are we on track? Are we on time? Are we on
Yep.
budget? What have you? But I I think it's like in each of those journeys, like anything that I delegate, it's like there's part of the value in me delegating is I'm giving somebody else an opportunity to step up,
Very
right?
good.
And so I've said I don't know I've said this before. Uh, Part of my job or part of what I've like secretly done is I get a job, I delegate as much of it as I can,
Yep.
which just like opens me up for more opportunities to like continue sort of like moving up or thinking about bigger problems or what
Yep.
have you. So the like active delegation is like very stress free for me
Hmm.
because it's good for the employee, it's good for me, it's good for the business, it's just good all around. And but if I'm not in the loop enough, then the person who I've delegated to, like there's might be things that they
Sure.
miss.
Yeah.
And not in terms of like doing the job, but like the lessons or the things to think about or what have you. And so I try to sort of, I don't want to like, do this thing and then I like tell me when it's done and then, sort of like never never talk about it again. But it's also not a like status updatey thing. It's like the journey is just like that's where all the lessons live.
Mm.
And it becomes so easy to be so focused on what the thing is that you're trying to build that you forget to sort of like and also you didn't know how to do this before and now you do, or you didn't notice this about this person before and now you did and you were able to do this or what have you. And so like helping people to reflect and learn and just get better at it as they're doing it is most of the reason I stay engaged is
Yeah.
not for lack of trust but more it's like if you're coaching a sport and you like give somebody some tips on form, like shooting form or something. I don't know. I played basketball in college. It's like, yeah, here's a new play you can try or what have you. Like, you don't just say it and run away and don't
Yeah.
watch it happen. Like you're there, you're with them, and this was great. And oh, and you did this. I didn't even think about that. That was amazing. I love that. We should take that and use that elsewhere. So I keep at it from sort of like that perspective, if that makes sense.
So does the glass ever get too full in that case?
For
Like,
me,
yeah.
oh gosh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. That I'd say is my growth opportunity is always like, well, how much do I take on?
Yeah.
And we've talked about like uh sort of like what bar you set for yourself.
Yep.
And some lessons I've learned like the real hard way is like, well, I'm willing to take on a lot. I have a pretty
Mm-hmm.
high tolerance for stress
Sure.
and nonsense and like all the things that go with work. And not everybody does. And like that's an example of like where I'm willing to take on more than other people. And I've been burned. And like, well, what that means is that like now, like all of the teams that I'm managing are like very busy and they're doing a lot of things
Yeah.
sort of because I've now delegated too much, and not because I should have delegated it, because I shouldn't have committed to it in the first place. And so yeah, that is a that's been a thing I've had to improve on. And I think the other challenge is less like not at all now because system initiative is quite small, but one of my positions I was responsible for a very large org, maybe 220 engineers around the world,
Yeah.
and at that point I was, a few, maybe 4 layers removed from
Yeah.
the engineers. And that like it's so hard to know what's happening and to
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
the weight of like how much work is going on when all you're getting are drive-bys or, the telephone game of like how things are going
Yeah.
potentially. And so that can be tough too, is it's like if you get too disconnected, then even if all of my best intentions on delegation are great, but what I'm doing is I'm just like driving the team or the org,
Yeah.
like we're going 60 and a 25, and maybe we shouldn't do that, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting too, like how in I'm gonna equate it back to just a football analogy because it's top of mind for me right now. Like we're at the time of the year, like in like National Football League in America, like where coaches get fired and coaches are getting hired, right? And like it's very simple to say like, oh, the coach didn't do a good job, but like at the end of the day, like the coach isn't actually doing the actual thing, right? The coach is, implementing a philosophy and a culture that should institute winning, right? And
Uh-huh.
I equate it very much to like managerial styles or like managing or, running organizations, right? Like you're not writing code, hopefully, as like somebody who runs engineering. But however, like you are, to an extent, like the way that you implement the philosophy, the culture, the way things are being done directly affects the way that code is being written. So like how when you think about that, like obviously you want to build a culture of inclusiveness and all these sort of great things, but like what are some of the things that you think about that like some of the like principles of like organizations that can engineering organizations that are successful or could be effective?
Yeah, I think we like you talked about engineers and being just sort of like this like naturally curious,
Yep.
sort of like curiosity being like a usually a pretty strong strength in
Yep.
engineers. I think one of the things that I look for is people who are curious
Mm-hmm.
in not just tactics, but are also sort of like intrinsic, like reflectively curious, if you
Yeah.
will. So you know, you don't want to take yourself too seriously. You don't
Sure.
want to assume you're so right. You also don't want to assume you're so wrong, right? And so, in order to have uh, an incredibly aligned, like collaborative engineering org, what I really look for and really kind of like challenge my team to do is to sort of like reflect, challenge yourself, challenge each other, but from a place of curiosity, not from a place of competition or not from a place of ego. Um, and that, when everybody can sort of adopt that, then you can have some of the most amazingly conflicted conversations happening,
Sure.
but they're
Yeah.
like so good, like they're the right conversations. It's the right conflict for all the right reasons. And everybody's intentions are in that same lens of like being curious about both the problem and the solution, the impacts of the solution, the trade-offs that you're choosing, like all of the different factors that go into like whatever the decision is. And it could be, a single line of code that you're writing. It could be a framework that you're implementing. It could be a new tool that you're pulling in. Even the call to like, is this feature the right feature?
Yep.
Like approaching all of that with curiosity has just is something that I've found to be incredibly helpful. And the people who are able to do that most and model it of themselves, right? And so being able to like throw ideas out and like, yeah, you don't want what's the saying? Oh gosh, the strongly committed, loosely held. What's the
Yeah.
strong opinions loosely held? Like, not, you don't want strong opinions loosely held. You want strong opinions, but with like strong curiosity
Yeah.
internally also to sort of like get into it and kind of feel that out.
That's a really important thing too. Like I think that one thing that a lot of folks struggle with, not just in tech but in general, is like you have an opinion. I think there's two things that you can do wrong. You have an opinion and you cannot, like, that opinion is like literally carved into rock and it's never going away. And there's also like the flip side where you have an opinion but you're easily convinced your opinion is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you see that a lot in all aspects of life. Like there's either people that are so stubborn you can't convince them otherwise, and there's people that literally just go with the wind. So, and I think like in the middle is where success is, right? Like
Uh-huh.
it's
Exactly.
very it's
Exactly.
very important to like stand by your laurels. But if somebody comes along with like definitive evidence, like, hey, your laurels aren't that great, you should be able
Mm-hmm.
to, like you should be able to accommodate. So here's a question. Obviously at some point in time you were, an engineer, individual computer contributor. You were quote unquote doing the work, right? At what point in time did you realize like, hey, I have other skill sets that I want to test out and go into more of a managing people, managing organizations, kind of the like the philosophical area of like team building and things like that.
I think I don't know that there was like a moment for me, more
Mm,
because like the reason that there wasn't a moment is like, the early team I worked on was quite small,
sure.
and part of that, like, it led sort of the opportunity to just
Yep.
be a general thought leader
Yep.
across lots of areas naturally. Um, and I had just, I don't know, maybe out of ignorance, or I didn't, I was too young. I didn't understand that there were politics. I didn't understand that, like, there's career path, like that there's different way, like roads you can take and different like ways that you can like earn the conversation.
Sure.
I didn't know any of that. All I wanted to do was like be really good at my job, work on important things, and like make a difference. And anything that was like in the way of those things, I wanted to solve
Yeah.
those problems. And it just sort of led, like, I was like in the right place at the right time,
Yeah.
where like
Yeah.
the problem to be solved was my manager was getting promoted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and there was sort of a vacuum, and it's like, oh well, I think I can do this. I think I would like doing this. I like working with people. And it was sort of, it was pretty organic, but it was, it's part of why I like, that the idea, like fostering that culture of curiosity,
Yeah.
and you know treating everybody like adults, and yes, not micromanaging their time and like how much time their butts in the seat and sort of all of those things. But you give people, it ends up giving people so much insights and opportunity in ways that, like, it doesn't have to always be a very formal path that somebody takes.
Sure.
And you can give people glimpses of it, and you'll see like who wants it and who doesn't, just by nature of like, well, everybody has the opportunity to be able to speak up and influence where we're going in this certain path. The people who do are the ones who want to speak up and want to influence, and where that goes. And I was, just sort of afforded that throughout my entire career. Um, there, and I would say on the flip side, there also wasn't this moment of like, oh no, like I've made a mistake, like take me back to the code again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I never felt that, like, oh, like I just wish I had more time to program. I mean, like,
Mm,
in sort of like the, you know, like I've never felt that I have, I don't know, like disobeyed my soul, or I don't know,
sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
like, gone too far away from the thing I loved, because the thing I loved was solving problems that are important and having an impact. And I needed a team to do that anyways. Like I was never individually contributing actually anyways.
Mm,
Like it always took an organization, it took a
yeah.
team, it took
Yeah. Yeah.
multiple teams. And I knew that. And so knowing that, it was like, well, it just, I don't know, it's all, to me, it's like the same path. Like,
Yeah, because I was gonna ask you, like, at any point have you done like a retrospective and you're like, how did I get here? Like, what
Oh,
happened? Like, I did,
yes,
like,
yes.
you look at your CV and you're like, oh, like, I kind of went from here to here. Like, how did that happen? Like, but I think it goes to like, if you're a naturally curious person, you kind of like open your eyes and you're like, what happened like the last like year? Like, I kind of was just doing work and keeping my head down and doing stuff, and then next thing I know, I'm like running a team of 10 people, running a team of 20 people, or whatever it is, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
so,
Uh-huh.
but, it's interesting to hear that you don't have like any inklings of like regret or, what's the way to phrase this? Like,
Oh, like longing. Maybe that's like a
Yeah,
better, like
yeah,
it's, I'm not
yeah,
like longing to go back to a time that
yeah,
once was, because all of the feelings I got from, as a junior, as a software engineer in my, first few years, like all of the feelings I get those same feelings doing what I'm doing
yep,
today. And so I think that, yeah, so there's nothing to long for because I still have it.
yeah.
I'm still doing it.
Yeah, I think it's like because when you're an engineer, your responsibility is to like you have Jira tickets or you have work items or you're kind of a you're kind of a servant to getting work assigned to you to an extent if you're at a particular level, and then you start doing like the assigning of work or the mentoring and all that stuff. But then you get to a point where you're like, you know, okay, I'm kind of away from the technology. Even though you're in engineering, you're away from the technology. Like, you're still making technology decisions, but you're very much like moving the business forward.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what was that shift like for you? Because I imagine as somebody that has, a math background, engineering, like making that like that shift dichotomy to like, hey, like technology like isn't the important thing. It's a tool to move the
Yeah,
business
it's the
forward.
means.
Yeah.
And I think part of where that transition wasn't super painful is like I always felt that way anyways.
Yeah.
Because my hobby wasn't building things with software. I
Yeah.
wasn't building mods for games. I wasn't into video games growing up. Like I was there was so much of like the hobby part of the industry
Sure.
that so many people where what starts as a hobby becomes a career. For me, it was like always just a career. There was never a hobby to it. And
Mm.
only now later in life is there more of a hobbyist side where I'm like curious about applications in other places. But I think that's part of why that transition hasn't been super crazy for me because it was always the means to an end.
Yeah.
I've only worked in B2B companies,
Sure.
and part of that was the amplifying effect of like, well, if I can, well, who are our customers? And if
Yeah.
I'm helping those customers do their job better, who are those customers?
Yeah.
And look at all this, like look at all the
Yeah. Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, if you actually do
It just
like if you actually do the mapping, it's like how many people like the stuff that you do affect, right? Like it's kind of fascinating. Like, oh, I write code for some product or for some feature that's in a product that's used by another product that's sold to companies, and those companies embedded into their systems to sell it to customers, and then those customers have end users like you. Like the tree gets so big, and then you're like,
uh-huh.
oh shit, like my stuff touched like hundreds of thousands,
Like
if not millions
that.
of people touch my thing,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Like that for me, like that's what I chase. Like the
Yeah.
impact of what I'm doing is what I'm chasing. And so I can do that through leading a team. I
Hmm.
can do that through my own hands, but I know that like my 10 fingers will never be able to do what a full team of amazing engineers can do. Like I just
Sure,
I
sure.
just know that. And so I just kind of let it go.
I
you
mean,
know?
no, I think that there's some healthy thought to that, right? We were talking about a bit earlier before we actually started streaming about like being type A and wanting to not like having trouble relinquishing control and like wanting to like own the thing end to end, right? And how that can be somewhat unhealthy because you become to an extent a control freak, right? And
Mhm.
the ability to like I'm going to let the people that are more equipped focus on what they can do, and I'll focus on what I'm more equipped to do, which I think is a very healthy way of going about things, right? The one of the things that's interesting to me too is like, especially like in your area of focus, like in this like DevOpsy sort of world, like there's not just technology, it's also culture and people and process, right? Like
Mhm.
when did you realize, like, first off, like when did you first start working with DevOps stuff? We'll start there.
Yeah. What year would it have been? Wasn't incredibly long ago, maybe 6 years ago. So, I got my first job as an entry-level engineer building desktop applications for an on-prem application.
Hmm.
That on-prem application was moving to the cloud,
Sure.
and we sent sort of a tiger team to like, all right, let's start from scratch. Like, what would happen if we started from scratch in this organization? And we started from scratch and we built a cloud native multi-tenant. Well, maybe not entirely cloud native, as cloud native as we knew we could do at the time.
Sure.
Um, multi-tenant application in an organization that had like only really ever prioritized on-prem products in an
Sure.
on-prem motion, right? And all of that work, led me just sort of square to DevOps. But it wasn't immediate. It was, first it was like, maybe it's an agile problem. Like maybe the
Yeah.
process isn't working, right? Like, oh, okay, like maybe the sprints are too long, like we're not getting the feedback we want. Maybe we
Sure,
should go
sure.
from 3 weeks to two. I was like, maybe we should go from 2 weeks to one. And it's like, well, maybe we should just like sprint every day, like, okay, so
Yeah.
maybe it's not an agile problem. And then, you sort of like work its way in, and it led me to DevOps, where I think sort of exactly what you said. It's where people and process and technology and the business, like it's almost the last piece in
Yeah.
in the chain, where all of that stuff meets. And at the time, like I thought what I wanted was, we had shipped our whatever 15th feature that nobody really used, and we saw it because we had the data, right? We had
Yeah,
product
yeah.
analytics. We did a thing, we had a splash, nobody used it.
Yeah.
And the nth number time that happens as an engineering leader, you start to like, okay, well, what's going on? Because the team now is like demotivated because they all want to build stuff that has a great impact, and clearly
Sure.
we're not having the impact of what's going on, right? And we weren't able to learn fast enough. We weren't able to get feedback fast enough because we couldn't deliver fast enough. Well, why couldn't we deliver fast enough? Well, because, and then you start to like untangle the mess, and all roads just sort of all roads led to DevOps.
Yeah.
And
The
yeah.
the delivering velocity thing is very interesting to me because like I think a lot of people hyper focus on like, oh, if I get new stuff out there as much as possible. I have a caveat to that. It's like you just don't want to ship to ship, right? Because that becomes a culture thing that's very problematic, right? Like, so there needs to be like a pretty good balance of like shipping with intent or shipping with
Uh-huh.
purpose.
Yes.
And
Yes.
like I see a lot of companies like, oh, we push every 2 days, every week, whatever. It's like, but are you doing that because you think you have to? Or
Yeah.
are you doing that because you think there actually is value that you're bringing on every single release? Or is it just a matter of like we have a system in place that does it kind of automatically for us, so why not take advantage of it?
Yeah, it's hard though, because I think if you don't set that in your scopes, do you ever get to the point where I can ship fast, but I choose not to? Right. And I
Yeah,
think that's maybe the goal that you're
yeah,
dreaming about, which is, yeah, I want to be able to release on every commit, and I want to say this commit's not worth it. It's
yeah,
like it's not
yeah,
worth it by itself, whatever, even as lightweight as it can be, I want to be able to make the call that it's not worth it. There's not enough value in there, and that can be totally fine. But I guess I would be curious if you'd ever get there if you don't seek, it's like kind of similar to like the means to an end, right? Like
yep,
being able to deliver as quickly and as fastly and safely and securely as possible gives you the right to say, no, I don't want to, right?
yeah,
And so it's I 100% understand what you're saying. There's sort of like a mental hack in there, which is like, what would be the other thing that you can sort of, I don't know, a target you could describe, a goal that you could describe that would give you that ability to say,
yeah.
no, I don't want to ship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean like there's technology out there that kind of solves this problem, right? But like the problem isn't the technology. The problem is the necessity for a team to do a particular act, right? Like tools are just tools, right? I think that's one of the things that DevOps is like, I think it's proven time and time again. The tools don't matter. Like the tools can be helpful for sure, but if you don't have the right system in place, you don't have the right culture in place, your team structure is in the right way, like you can use every tool under the sun and it's not going to
For
bring any
sure.
benefit to you.
For sure, for sure. But I would argue that the opposite could be true, which is if you have the best culture and you have the best system and you have the best processes, but you don't have the right tools, like if you're hand uh, if you're hand reviewing code and you're faxing it to each other, and that's how you're getting code into the system, like, all right, maybe that's not going to work. So I think like because we've iterated so much on technology, and I think because so many people have felt like even if we had better tools, our culture still prevents us for these reasons, or our processes are getting in our way for these reasons. It becomes easy to say the tools don't matter. I'm going to challenge you. I think the tools do matter,
Sure.
but they matter alongside all of those other things.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's not one silver bullet that's going to say, you have this tool, it's going to fix your culture, or you have this tool and it's going to fix your processes. But I have certainly experienced what I would describe as, the most supportive of upper level leadership in building the culture, the autonomy to choose the tools, the autonomy to choose the processes, sort of everything that you kind of get in a startup, I had in a large enterprise. And the best we could do was still mediocre, and it just never felt good. Like we always knew we could do better, but it was never clear what better looked like because we had, foreseeably everything we thought we could
Yeah.
need. And it still
Sure.
didn't feel good.
Yeah, and I think this is a great transition into like, you work at System Initiative. We talk kind of like what your role is there. Maybe do a little bit of, introduce System Initiative to my our listeners, and like, what the problem that is trying to be solved with System Initiative.
Yeah. So system initiative is sort of, if you take the goal of DevOps, which, I would describe as sort of a group of people working together, enabling the fast flow of work, right? Like whatever the quote is from the
Sure.
DevOps handbook. System initiative sort of looks at that problem and say, yeah, that problem still exists, but the world that we described, like we still want to live in that world.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
what happens if we throw out all the rules that we've agreed to live by and rethink the system as a whole? One of the things that you end up with is system initiative. So, system initiative is open source. We have an open beta product out there for people to try, and we're sort of gearing up for an open or for a SaaS launch later this year. But it's a real-time, multiplayer, multimodal sort of reinvention of DevOps tooling. So it takes a lot of the lessons we've learned in infrastructure as code, combining with the lessons we've learned in sort of collaboration and facilitating collaboration, and kind of mashes it all up together.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because obviously, if you think about DevOps tools like ALM tools, I don't really like using the phrase ALM anymore, but like there's a lot of players out there, right? So when we think about like what encompasses like an ALM tool, like the planning, the portfolio, obviously the CI/CD part of it, like the System
Uh-huh.
Initiative, does it kind of fill all of those gaps, or is it hyper focused on a particular area of DevOps or ALM that suits the needs that it's trying to, I guess, solve or
Yeah.
answer to?
Yeah, not yet. No, it definitely doesn't do all of that yet. Right now, we're really focused on infrastructure,
Okay.
creating and managing infrastructure, and we can see how the world sort of expands left up the pipeline from there. But what we're doing right now, so one of the interesting innovations with System Initiative is, instead of treating your infrastructure as a bunch of flat files in a repository
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
configurations sort of littered around, System Initiative is a product that you log into, that you navigate through a user interface that provides all the code needed to run the infrastructure that you're managing. But what we do is we build this digital twin of your infrastructure. And so we're capturing sort of all of the relationships between the
Mm-hmm.
configuration data, between, like what region are you using and which instances are you using, which instances are in that region, right? Like there's all of these
Yeah.
implicit relationships that exist. They exist for real. We need to be able to capture all of it and captures it together.
Yeah.
And so focusing on like building as close to one that digital twin with the world, with AWS for now is where we're focused on, with certainly plans to expand to other cloud providers and integrations from there. But that is where we're focused today, is can we build a one-to-one digital twin of your cloud infrastructure and
Yeah.
let you see and navigate and use and build and manage and hopefully have some better outcomes.
I mean, at the end of the day, right, I think that the downfall to like modern DevOps is the dependency on textual representation of your infrastructure, right? Like that. I mean, all like I understand that IAC is the greatest thing ever. Like I'm not trying to knock that.
It's better
What?
than not having IAC.
Yes.
Like, let's be clear.
Yes.
It's better than
Yes.
not having
Yes,
IAC.
exactly. However, right, when you're hyper dependent on YAML files or JSON files or some other proprietary format or some other proprietary frameworks to manage these things, like it becomes very challenging because you have to learn those tools. You have to find
Uh-huh.
people that know those tools. You have to make sure those tools fit into your existing workflow. If for whatever reason those tools don't have a particular feature that you need, oh well, right? So the
Exactly.
ability to
Exactly.
visually represent your infrastructure is really interesting, right? So, one of the ideas that I've loved to think about too is like it's just as simple as like a relationship graph, right? Like if you can see all of your stuff at once and the ability to replicate it without concern is really ideal. And you're telling me that System Initiative is there to kind of solve that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's Like, what do you do when you get together and you're talking about a new project or you're needing to design something new? Like, you get out a whiteboard or you get out
Yes.
Lucid Chart or
Yes.
something and you're drawing
Yep.
because like visual representation
You're
is like a
not, wait,
really
no, no,
effective
no, no.
way.
Hold on, hold on. When I actually talk with IAC about people, we actually just write YAML on the
You
whiteboard.
bring me next time you do that. I would love
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah,
I'd
yeah,
love
yeah.
to come
Yeah.
by on those.
I'm not. I haven't figured out like the spacing and indents very well on a whiteboard, but Anyway, I interrupted you for a joke. Continue. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's like we know that visually, like displaying
Mm-hmm.
information is like a great way to share context, right? And one thing that we know needs to be true is like that trade-off that you just described, which is like I picked that tool, it works great for like the 95%
Yeah.
case,
Mm-hmm.
but the 5% case, like now what do I got to do? Now I got to go be an expert. Now I got to go learn Go, and hopefully they take my commit back to be able
Yeah.
to like now have that 5%. You can't like that trade-off is like we don't have to live with it anymore. We should not
Yeah.
have to live with it in the first place. And so with system initiative, it's not only that you can see the reality as it is, you can like open up the hood of the proverbial car and be like, all right, and how it's working. And now I'm in a different climate. I need something a little bit different here, and you can do it live right in the product itself. And so it's
Yeah.
taking like the DevOps workflow from the context of a DevOps engineer is a lot of bouncing between tools and repositories and languages and
Yeah.
stitching these things together, right? And when what we've done with System Initiative is say, hey, like maybe not, maybe don't context switch between all
Sure.
these repositories to get the job done. Bring it in, but you need to have control. You need to have transparency, and you need to be able to share it and bring other people to the yard to come see
Yeah.
and see what's going on too, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that it's probably been like the last 10 years or so where we've seen the introduction of technology that has kind of bettered us as technologists. However, those technologies that have been introduced have really rough edges. And we've seen like I mean, in the last 5 years specifically, like I think of like Kubernetes, for instance, like the amount of companies that have been created to kind of wrap Kubernetes or simplify Kubernetes, the amount of cloud services that exist to like, oh, you want Kubernetes but you don't want to like manage all the Kubernetes stuff, like here, use this. Like, and it's fascinating to me that like you think about DevOps and there's similar problems, like we're hyper dependent on all these things we talked about, but there hasn't been like an attempt really to like, hey, all these rough edges that exist for DevOps in like from a technology standpoint, like here's a tool to fix that. Usually it's just,
Yeah.
oh, like you need to learn you need to learn Terraform front and back, or you need to learn CDK or whatever it is. Like, and then you're fine. But like, oh yeah, vendor lock-in, that's great. So the idea that it's like there's an open source tool out there that exists that allows you to, you know, intelligently define what your infrastructure is, and you don't
Mhm.
have to look at files and be like, you don't need to have ChatGPT open saying, okay, what does this YAML file actually do? Like, that's great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. As you were talking, I was thinking about a question you asked me about my projects, like because I think like some of these rough edges, like they're some of them I sort of factor the equivalent of like me saying, hey, the project's done enough because it meets the need. Like
Yep.
functionally, it does the job, right? And
Yep.
so whoever wrote that piece at that time, they wrote it for a reason. They didn't write it for all reasons forever and ever, amen. And so
Yeah.
it's like it's usually in these gaps where like most of the rough edges are. It's like the handoffs, or
Yeah.
again, it's like that the 5% case
Hmm.
of it works great, except, and in the except, I
Yeah.
have to like pull out all the stops to get done what I need to do. Uh, it's it's no one tool's fault. Like it's
Yeah.
nobody's fault.
No.
But I think
No.
that's the sort of the perspective that we've taken with System Initiative is sort of taking a step back and looking at like, okay, like what is the job? Like what is the problem to be solved? Which is different than, oh, what sucks is I have to rerun my Terraform plan if,
Yep.
or,
Yeah.
like, yes, that is a problem, but that's not like the only problem. Or, what sucks is like syncing these Helm charts across all these Kubernetes nodes. Like, yeah, that does suck. And now there's a great tool that helps with that
Yep.
piece. But like, why did you have to do that in the
Yeah.
first place?
I
Sort
think
of
it's
like the
yeah.
7 whys to some degree, or 8 whys, or whatever that sentence
Yeah,
is.
yeah. I equate it kind of to like this, right? Like products are built for happy paths. Customers don't work in happy paths. right? Every customer, every company does their thing just a little bit different because they're all special snowflakes, right? Um, but when you build a product, you can't build a product expecting it to be completely robust for every single use case, right?
Right.
So
Right.
like, and
Right.
you're in the B2B space, so you know this, right? Like, if you can get 95% of the way there, like, there's partners that can implement and people and community members that can build
Yes.
on top
Yep.
of it and do all these things, right? To kind of get you that last 5%. But it can't be your responsibility as like the person that manages or maintains the 95% to like, hey, random company in Switzerland that has some GDPR concern and also they do these particular things. Like, how exactly can we solve your very niche problem?
Yes. Yes. Yep. Yep. And that's, I think, where, like, both where, like, open source is huge, and the idea that, like, within our product, like, all of the code is transparent. Like, the code
Yeah.
that is running these models, you can see it, and you can modify it inline right there, right when you need to. And that I think I'm excited to see what that does when people are able to have a problem,
Mhm.
click a couple of buttons, and then solve the problem, as opposed to what they would have to do today, which is spin up a partner network or a channel
Yeah.
network
Yeah,
to, like,
exactly.
compensate for some way.
Yeah, it's like this new, like, I think, the phrase that I hear a lot is like platform engineering, right? Like
Yeah.
the idea of like, I want to be able I want to be able to, define my infrastructure. I want to be able to govern my infrastructure. I want it to be re-implementable. That's not a word, but whatever. Like, and I want all of these things, but also like I need the people that are actually dependent on the infrastructure to have autonomy to build the infrastructure themselves, right? So like, when I see something like system initiative, I'm like, this is one step in the way of like what platform engineering is trying to is the one of the goals of it, right? Like being able to, you mentioned setting up a digital twin for an AWS network, right? Like, yes, there are different ways to do that, but is there a way that's allows you to do it with a few clicks or a few configurations, right? Like, no, you got to build this stuff by hand usually because things are hard.
because things are hard, and I think that's I like platform engineering is sort of a category, and like the
Yeah.
marketing spin, like AWS is a platform,
Mhm.
GCP is a platform, Azure
Mhm.
is a platform,
Mhm.
so we know, like, what the platform effect can do. We've known for 100 plus years how platforms and how automation can improve outcomes and improve efficiency and all of these things. I think what we've missed to date is this idea that, like, it's not just about making it easier.
Yeah.
It's about having a good experience when what you're doing is fundamentally hard, and it's hard on purpose. Like, the thing
Yeah.
is just hard. Like, that's if it weren't hard, everybody would be doing it and nobody would have these
I mean,
problems.
I say this all the time. Like, not everything needs an easy button. Like,
Yes,
because
yes, yes.
at the end of the day, like, there are things that are intentionally hard because, like, that's where you provide value,
Exactly,
right? And, like,
exactly, exactly.
if, I'm not saying this is the case, but if system initiative, if it replaces 25 people, that's not a knock on those people. That's a knock on the process that can just easily, like, displace people by the implementation of some product or service, right?
Right,
So like
right,
it's one of those
right.
it's interesting because we're getting to this path now, and this is, I think, this is a good place to wrap up on. It's like we have so many tools and we have so many services to solve problems because technology is very, very complex. And you see, especially like in this world now where AI is supposed to is the revolution, and it's re-architecting everything, and the companies are having to completely rethink how they do everything because of AI, right? But also you have to remember that like the existing issues in technology that are primitive to technology, you know resiliency, scalability,
Hmm. Capacity
flexibility,
management.
capacity,
Yep,
like these
yep.
things. And also, like, to an extent, like how you ship, how you actually manage the people of when it comes to shipping, the organizational structure, those things aren't going away by AI is not fixing those things,
Yeah, no.
right? So we need to focus on these things. Like, AI is great, AI is very important, but like, don't take all of the investment that you want to do in all these other areas that are primitive to technology and shift them over to AI, because at the end of the day, in 5 years from now, when the like AI is implemented across, like so is DevOps. So
Yeah.
is so is
Yeah,
the so is
we're not
yeah.
going to get very far
No.
with AI if we can't ship software but once every 6 weeks, right?
This is very oh my
The
gosh.
internet's if AI's told us anything, the internet's not going anywhere, and we all have a heck of a
Yeah.
lot of job security.
This is oh my gosh, tell me about it. This has been a great conversation, Brett. I've really, it's been great to get to know you a little bit and what your history is, how you think a little bit as it pertains to organization of teams and engineering, and then talk a little bit about what you're doing as initiative, because I think that the need to be able to visualize all of these arcane things like YAML files, JSON files, infrastructure in general, like it's just going to make the life of a technologist a bit better. And I think that's great. And
Yeah.
as we wrap up, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on like thinking about the conversation we've just had, the work you're doing as System Initiative, your kind of career into management and running organizations and engineering, but you only had a word or two to think about kind of what that feeling that you get is. What would that word or words be for you?
Ooh, I think the first word that comes to my head is just I'm pumped. Like I'm just pumped
Pumped. Oh
because
man.
like this is it's gonna be a fun year for System Initiative. It's gonna be a fun year for the industry. I'm pumped to see what happens. We're not the only ones
Yep.
trying to break some rules and challenge some assumptions, and I'm excited to see what where everybody else ends up.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what you folks are doing. And if you want to follow along with what, Brit and team are doing at System Initiative, you can find her on LinkedIn, Brit Meyers, or you can go to the System Initiative website. There'll be a link to that as well as some other places to learn more in the show notes. So, before we sign off today, my friend, is there anything parting word that you'd like to relay on?
No, I don't think so. This was great. Thank you so much for spending the time. I could talk to you for another hour.
Oh man, I tell you what, like I love having conversation with people that actually are passionate about technology, and you're one of those. And it was great talking to you. And thanks for everybody tuning in live and listening in the future. This is Isaac Levin from Coffee and Open Source, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.